In the year 2147, humanity stood on the edge of a dangerous cliff. The stars, once seen as symbols of hope and exploration, now loomed like threats in the night sky. For years, Earth had been expanding into nearby star systems, searching for resources to support its growing population. But this expansion came at a cost. A group of alien species called the Concord grew more and more upset with humanity's actions. They accused humans of taking over planets that didn't belong to them, and breaking agreements meant to keep peace. Tensions had risen so high that small battles had already broken out along the borders of human space. On board the diplomatic ship SS Horizon, Daniel Carter sat quietly in his cabin, staring at the glowing screen in front of him. He scrolled through reports about the upcoming peace talks. These negotiations were supposed to be the last chance to avoid an all-out war between humanity and the Concord. Daniel wasn't sure if he believed they would work, but he had to try. Too much was at stake. If the talks failed, it wouldn't just mean war, it could mean the end of humanity itself. Elena Ruiz walked into the room without knocking. She always did that, even though Daniel thought it was rude, but Elena didn't care much for formalities. Her sharp eyes scanned the room before landing on Daniel. "You look like you haven't slept in days," she said, her voice calm but firm. "I haven't," Daniel admitted, rubbing his temples. "Do you think we actually have a shot at this, or are we just wasting our time?" Elena crossed her arms and leaned against the wall. "We have to believe it's possible. Otherwise, why bother showing up?" She paused, then added, "Besides, if we don't try, we're handing the Concord an excuse to declare war." Daniel sighed. He knew she was right. Elena was one of the smartest people he'd ever met. A scientist by training, she had spent most of her life studying the stars and the alien cultures that lived among them. Now, she was part of the team trying to find common ground between two very different civilizations. It wasn't easy. Humans and aliens didn't just speak different languages. They thought differently, felt differently, and saw the universe in ways that often clashed. The horizon was nearing its destination, Epsilon 5, a neutral planet chosen for the peace talks. From the window of Daniel's cabin, he could see the pale blue glow of the planet growing larger as they approached. It was beautiful, but the beauty felt hollow. Everyone on board knew how fragile this moment was. One wrong word, one misstep, and everything could fall apart as they prepared to land. Daniel and Elena joined the rest of the delegation in the briefing room. The mood was tense. Some members whispered nervously about rumors they'd heard that factions within the Concord wanted war no matter what happened here. Others tried to stay optimistic, clinging to the hope that reason would win out. When the ship finally touched down, Daniel took a deep breath before stepping onto the platform that led outside. The air smelled strange, unfamiliar. Alien structures towered above them, their shapes twisting in ways that made his head spin. Across the field, the Concord representatives waited. Their leader, Ambassador Vexer, stood tall and imposing, his expression unreadable. "This is it," Elena murmured beside him. "Let's not screw it up." Daniel nodded, though doubts still gnawed at him. As they walked toward the meeting hall, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The Concord's silence felt too perfect, too calculated. Whatever happened next, Daniel knew one thing for certain. The fate of billions rested on what happened in that room, and failure wasn't an option, even if success seemed impossible. The meeting hall on Epsilon 5 was cold and sterile, its smooth metallic walls reflecting the dim light of overhead panels. Rows of chairs were arranged in a circle, with a large table at the center where documents and data pads lay neatly stacked. Daniel Carter took his seat beside Elena Ruiz, their chairs positioned directly across from Ambassador Vexer and the Concord delegation. The air felt heavy, as if the weight of countless lives pressed down on everyone in the room. Vexer began, without preamble. His voice was calm, but carried an edge of authority that made Daniel uneasy. "Humanity has shown no respect for the treaties we signed," he said, his eyes scanning the human representatives. "Your colonies encroach upon our territories. Your mining operations drain resources meant to sustain multiple species. You act as though this galaxy belongs only to you." Daniel shifted in his chair, his fingers gripping the edge of the table. He had expected accusations, but hearing them spoken aloud still stung. "We didn't break any treaties," he replied, his tone measured. "Every colony we established was built on unclaimed planets. Every resource we used was extracted legally under interstellar law." Vexer's response was immediate and sharp. "Unclaimed. Legally. These are terms you have invented to justify your greed. What gives humanity the right to decide what is unclaimed or legal? Your actions disrupt the balance we have worked centuries to maintain." Alina leaned forward slightly, her expression calm but focused. "Balance?" she asked. "If there is balance, why do so many of your people suffer while humanity thrives? Why does the Concord control nearly every major trade route, leaving others to struggle?" Her words seemed to strike a nerve. Vexer's gaze hardened, and one of his aides whispered something into his ear. For a moment, the room fell silent, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Daniel glanced at Alina, silently urging her to tread carefully. They couldn't afford to escalate things further. As the hours dragged on, the conversation grew more heated. Each side accused the other of hypocrisy, betrayal, and aggression. Daniel tried to keep the discussion focused on finding solutions, but it felt like trying to hold back a flood with bare hands. Every compromise he suggested was met with resistance. Every question Alina posed was dismissed or ignored. During a short recess, Daniel stepped outside for fresh air. The sky above Epsilon 5 was a pale gray, the sun hidden behind thick clouds. He stood alone, staring at the horizon, when Alina joined him. "This isn't going well," she said, her voice low. "No kidding," Daniel muttered. "It's like they came here just to argue." Alina frowned, her eyes narrowing as she thought. Maybe that's exactly why they're here. "Did you notice how quick Vexer was to shut down every suggestion we made? It's almost like he doesn't want peace." Daniel turned to look at her. "You think they've already decided to go to war?" "I don't know," Alina admitted, "but I wouldn't be surprised. Look at how rigid they are. They won't even consider alternatives. It's like they're following a script." Before Daniel could respond, a sudden commotion erupted inside the hall. Both of them hurried, back to find chaos unfolding. One of the Concord representatives was shouting, pointing an accusing finger at a human aide who held a datapad. "You brought weapons into the negotiation room." The alien roared. "This is a violation of protocol." The human aide looked panicked. "I don't know what you're talking about. That's not mine." Daniel stepped forward, raising his hands in a gesture of calm. "Let's not jump to conclusions," he said firmly. "We can sort this out peacefully." But Vexer wasn't interested in sorting anything out. His face was a mask of anger as he rose from his seat. "This proves what we already knew," he declared. "Humans cannot be trusted. The talks are over." And with that, the Concord delegation turned and left the room, their footsteps echoing like thunder. Daniel watched them go, his heart sinking. He had failed. Humanity had failed. As the reality of the situation settled over him, he realized the true purpose of these talks had never been peace. It had been a countdown to war. Back on Earth, the news of the failed peace talks spread quickly. Ryan Mitchell sat in a dimly lit room deep inside the United Defense Headquarters, staring at a holographic map of nearby star systems. The map showed red markers Concord fleets, moving closer to human colonies. Each marker felt like a ticking clock, counting down to disaster. Ryan's jaw tightened as he zoomed in on one cluster of markers near Deltanine, a small but vital mining outpost. If the Concord struck there, it would send a clear message. Humanity was vulnerable. Laura Hayes, the Vice Admiral overseeing Earth's military operations, entered the room without knocking. She carried a tablet filled with reports and updates. Her face was calm, but her eyes betrayed the stress she carried. "We've confirmed increased activity along our borders," she said, placing the tablet on the table. "They're testing us, Ryan. Seeing how far they can push before we react." Ryan leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. "And what do you want me to do? Start a war because they're flexing their muscles?" His tone wasn't angry, just tired. He'd spent years preparing for this moment, but now that it was here, he felt unprepared. War wasn't just about strategies and weapons, it was about lives. Billions of them. Laura crossed her arms and looked at him. "I'm not asking you to start anything, but we can't sit around waiting for them to hit us either. You know what happens if we lose Deltanine. It's not just a colony, it's a gateway to Vega Prime. If they take it, they'll cut off one of our main supply lines." Ryan nodded slowly. He knew she was right. Deltanine wasn't heavily defended, but it was too important to abandon. "Fine," he said after a pause. "Send reconnaissance drones to monitor their movements, and prep a response team. If they make a move, we need to be ready." While Ryan and Laura planned for the worst, the rest of Earth reacted to the collapse of the peace talks in its own way. News outlets broadcast non-stop coverage, showing images of the SS Horizon leaving Epsilon 5, and fiery speeches from politicians, calling for action. In cities across the globe, people gathered in streets and squares, holding signs that read "Protect our future" or "No more concessions." Some demanded retaliation against the Concord, while others pleaded for restraint. The divide was growing wider by the hour. In Chicago, Sarah Bennett tried to focus on her lesson plan, but her mind kept drifting to the news. She taught history at a local high school, and her students were full of questions. "Ms. Bennett, do you think we're going to war?" one boy asked during class. His voice trembled slightly, betraying his fear. Sarah forced a smile. "I don't know," she admitted. "But whatever happens, we have to stay strong. Wars aren't just fought with weapons, they're fought with hope, too." After school, Sarah walked through the park near her apartment, watching families playing together under the fading sunlight. Children laughed as they chased each other, unaware of the storm brewing light years away. Sarah wished she could shield them from the uncertainty ahead. Instead, she resolved to do what little she could. That evening, she joined a community group organizing food drives and emergency kits for refugees. If war came, there would be many who needed help. Meanwhile, in orbit above Earth, engineers worked tirelessly to upgrade ships and fortify defenses. Factories churned out weapons and supplies around the clock. Soldiers trained harder than ever, knowing their next mission might be their last. Despite the grim outlook, there was a sense of unity among those preparing for battle. They weren't fighting for glory or power, they were fighting for survival. As night fell over the planet, Ryan stood outside the headquarters, looking up at the stars. Somewhere out there, the Concorde was planning its next move. He didn't know when or where it would come, but he knew one thing for certain: humanity wouldn't go down without a fight. The SS Horizon drifted silently through space as it made its way back to Earth. The mood on board was grim, the weight of failure hanging over everyone like a dark cloud. Daniel Carter sat in the ship's communications room, staring at the blinking lights on the console. He hadn't slept since the peace talks collapsed, and the exhaustion was starting to show. His face was pale, his eyes bloodshot, but he couldn't bring himself to rest. Something about the way the Concorde had acted didn't sit right with him. Alina Ruiz entered the room quietly, her arms crossed against the chill of the ship. She glanced at Daniel and frowned. "You look terrible," she said bluntly. "When was the last time you slept?" "I don't know," Daniel muttered, without looking up. "Doesn't matter anyway." He tapped a few keys on the console, pulling up encrypted logs from the ship's communication systems. I've been going through these files. There's something weird here. Alina stepped closer, peering over his shoulder. What do you mean? There are messages, Daniel explained, pointing to a series of coded entries. Sent from someone on this ship to an unknown recipient outside the conference. I think we were sabotaged. Elena's eyes widened. Sabotaged? By who? That's the thing I don't know yet. Daniel leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his hair. But whoever it was, they wanted those talks to fail. Every argument, every accusation, it felt too perfect, like it was all part of a plan. Before Alina could respond, the lights flickered. For a brief moment, the entire ship went dark. Alarms blared, and red emergency lights flashed along the walls. Crew members rushed past the room, shouting orders and trying to figure out what had happened. Daniel stood quickly, his heart racing. Stay here, he told Alina. I'll check the main control room. No way, Alina shot back. If someone's messing with this ship, I'm not sitting around waiting to find out why. Reluctantly, Daniel nodded, and together they moved through the narrow corridors toward the control room. Along the way, they passed panicked crew members struggling to restore power. The air felt tense, almost suffocating. When they finally reached the control room, they found chaos. Screens displayed error messages, and engineers worked frantically to reboot systems. What's going on? Daniel demanded, grabbing one of the engineers by the arm. We don't know, the engineer stammered. It's like the system just shut itself down. We're locked out of everything. Alina moved to a nearby terminal, her fingers flying across the keyboard. Let me try something, she said. After a few moments, she cursed under her breath. Someone hacked the system. They're blocking our access. Daniel's mind raced. If the ship's systems were compromised, they were sitting ducks out here in deep space. And if the saboteur was still on board, we need to lock this place down, he said urgently. No one gets in or out until we figure out who's behind this. As they began securing the control room, the ship's intercom crackled to life. A voice came through, calm but cold. Attention, crew of the Horizon. This is Ambassador Vexer of the Concorde. Due to recent events, we have deemed your participation in these negotiations invalid. Humanity has proven itself unworthy of trust. Consider this message official notice. The Concorde will no longer engage in dialogue. Prepare for the consequences of your actions. The transmission ended abruptly, leaving silence in its wake. Daniel and Alina exchanged a look, both understanding the gravity of what had just happened. The sabotage wasn't just about ruining the talks, it was a declaration of war. Back in the communications room, Alina managed to isolate the source of the hack. Her jaw tightened as she traced it back to one of the human delegates. It's Peter Walsh, she said quietly, showing Daniel the evidence. He sent those messages. He's the one who did this. Daniel clenched his fists, anger boiling inside him. Why would he betray us? Does he want humanity to lose? Alina shook her head. Maybe, or maybe someone else convinced him it was the right thing to do. Either way, we can't let this go unanswered. As the Horizon limped back toward Earth, Daniel and Alina knew their fight wasn't over. The collapse of the peace talks was just the beginning, and the real battle was only moments away. The news of the Concorde's declaration spread across Earth like wildfire. Cities buzzed with tension, and people gathered around screens in homes, cafes, and public squares to watch President Andrew Kim address the United Nations. His face was calm but serious as he stood behind a podium, flanked by flags representing nations united under one cause: survival. Today, we face a challenge unlike any other in human history, he began, his voice steady. The collapse of peace talks has left us with no choice but to prepare for what may come next. But let me be clear, this is not a path we chose. We sought peace, and it was rejected. Now, we must stand together and defend our future. The Speech was broadcast globally, translated into dozens of languages. Some viewers nodded in agreement, their faces grim but determined. Others cried openly, fearing what lay ahead. In Chicago, Sarah Bennett watched the address from her small apartment, clutching a cup of tea that had gone cold. Her mind raced, with questions. Would her students grow up in a world at war? Would she even survive to see them graduate? Meanwhile, Ryan Mitchell and Laura Hayes worked tirelessly in the defense headquarters, mapping out strategies to protect humanity's most vulnerable colonies. The Delta 9 outpost remained a primary concern. It was poorly defended, but critical for maintaining supply lines to Vega Prime. If the Concorde attacked there, it would cripple Earth's ability to respond effectively. We need more ships, Ryan said, pacing the room, while Laura studied the holographic map. If they hit Delta 9, we'll lose ground before we even start fighting back. Laura sighed, rubbing her temples. I've already ordered reinforcements, but they won't get there in time if the Concorde moves fast. We're stretched thin, Ryan. Every fleet we send to one location leaves another exposed. Ryan stopped pacing and looked at her. Then, we make them think twice about attacking. Set traps, fake weaknesses, anything to buy us time. Laura raised an eyebrow. You want to gamble with lives? I'm not gambling, Ryan replied firmly. I'm buying us a chance. That's all we've got right now. As military leaders planned their defense, ordinary citizens found ways to contribute. Sarah joined a growing network of volunteers organizing aid for refugees who might flee war-torn colonies. She spent her evenings packing boxes of food and medical supplies, teaching others how to administer first aid, and spreading information about evacuation routes. Though she felt small compared to the enormity of the situation, she refused to give up hope. In orbit above Earth, engineers worked around the clock to upgrade ships and develop new technologies. One breakthrough came when Alina Ruiz returned from the horizon with data recovered during the sabotage investigation. Her analysis revealed fragments of alien tech embedded in the hacked systems. Scientists pored over the information, reverse engineering components to improve human shields and weapons. These upgrades could give us an edge, Laura told Ryan after reviewing the progress. But it's still not enough to match the Concorde's firepower. It doesn't have to be, Ryan said. We just need to hold on long enough for diplomacy to catch up, or for them to realize they've bitten off more than they can chew. Days turned into weeks, and the waiting game began. Humanity braced itself for the storm, knowing it would come sooner or later. On the front lines, soldiers trained harder than ever, their resolve strengthened by the knowledge that billions depended on them. Back on Earth, families held each other a little tighter, cherishing moments that might soon feel like memories. When the attack finally came, it wasn't where anyone expected. Instead of targeting Delta 9, the Concorde struck a remote research station near the edge of human space. The assault was swift and brutal, leaving no survivors. When news of the massacre reached Earth, it ignited a firestorm of outrage. Protests erupted worldwide, demanding justice and action. For many, surrender was no longer an option, was unthinkable. Ryan stared at the reports of the attack, his jaw clenched. They're sending a message, he said quietly. But they've made one mistake. What's that? Laura asked. They've underestimated us.